The morning air was crisp and clear when Michael stepped onto the porch of the small farmhouse that sat at the edge of his newly purchased property. It wasn't much to look at, just acres of open fields, scattered clusters of trees, and a single gravel road cutting through the land. But to him, it was more than enough. This was an investment, something he intended to hold on to quietly, letting time and opportunity do their work. He had purchased the land years earlier when the town nearby was still just a modest cluster of shops, diners, and quiet neighborhoods. Most people had overlooked the property. It was too far from the main road, too large to manage without effort, and lacked the utilities and infrastructure that developers wanted. But Michael saw something different. He saw location, potential, and the kind of steady growth that could turn a forgotten piece of land into something valuable. Rather than sell it off in a single deal, he structured the sales creatively. When developers eventually came knocking, he agreed to let them build on it, but with a condition. The buyers could own the buildings, but the land beneath them would remain his. Every single parcel would be leased, not sold. It was unusual, but not unheard of, and the developers, eager to start building, agreed without much hesitation. Years passed, and the once quiet fields began to change. Streets appeared first, then sidewalks, then rows of houses, each one rising from the ground, in neat succession. What had been open sky now had the steady hum of construction, the smell of fresh lumber, and the sound of power tools echoing across the property. Michael visited only occasionally, keeping a low profile. The leases were in place, the contracts airtight, and the arrangement worked exactly as he had intended. By the time the final houses were finished, the land looked nothing like it had before. Nearly 100 homes stood where wild grass and trees once grew. Young families moved in, children played in the streets, and the neighborhood began to take on its own personality. Michael, however, remained largely invisible to its residents. They didn't know his name, and they certainly didn't know the full details of their land agreements. To them, their homes were theirs, standing proudly on what they believed to be their own yards. What Michael found most fascinating was how quickly an organized homeowners association formed. As the neighborhood grew, residents decided they needed rules, structure, and a central voice to handle community matters. The HOA became that voice. They organized events, maintained the common areas, and enforced neighborhood guidelines. From the outside, Michael observed everything. He didn't interfere, didn't attend meetings, and didn't comment on the decisions they made. His ownership of the land was not in dispute. The paperwork was clear, filed, and recorded, but he saw no reason to involve himself unless necessary. Still, there were moments when he wondered if, someday, someone in the neighborhood might stumble across the truth. Not just about a few shared spaces or property lines, but about the fact that every single home was standing on land he owned outright. He didn't dwell on it, but the thought lingered. As seasons passed, the neighborhood settled into its rhythm. Trees that had been planted during construction grew taller. Driveways showed the wear of daily use, and the sound of laughter carried across backyards in the summer. Michael was content to let things continue as they were. Quiet, steady, and predictable. He didn't yet know that change was on the horizon. Not the kind that came from weather or new families moving in, but the kind that came from a person with big plans, a strong voice, and no idea of the hidden foundation beneath it all. The first time Michael heard her name, it came in the form of a polite flyer slipped into his mailbox. It was a neatly printed announcement from the Homeowners Association, welcoming residents to the new era of community management. At the bottom, in bold letters, was the signature, Karen, HOA President. Karen had moved into the neighborhood only a year earlier, but she had quickly made herself known. She was efficient, articulate, and always visible. Whether she was jogging down the main street in the morning or greeting neighbors at the mailbox, she gave off the air of someone who was deeply invested in the well-being of the community. Within months of her arrival, she had been elected HOA, president almost unanimously. She wasted no time putting her ideas into motion. Rules were reviewed, updated, and expanded. Lawn maintenance standards became more specific, fence heights were regulated, and all exterior paint colors had to be pre-approved by the board. These changes were rolled out in cheerful newsletters with friendly reminders, but Michael could see they were anything but optional. From his position as the quiet landowner, Michael didn't take issue with most of it. If the residents wanted stricter guidelines, that was their decision. Still, he couldn't help but notice the way Karen spoke about the neighborhood. In her words, the HOA was the heart and soul of the community, the ultimate authority. She often referred to our land, our rules, and our shared vision. It was a small detail, but it stood out to Michael. One Saturday afternoon, as Michael drove past the Central Park area, he saw Karen standing with a small group of board members. They were gesturing at the open space as if planning something new. He slowed slightly as he passed and caught snippets of conversation. Expansion, better use of the space, boosting home values. It was clear she had ambitions that went beyond simple upkeep. Over the next few weeks, changes began to appear. New flower beds were planted at the entrance, community bulletin boards were installed, and decorative lighting lined the main walking paths. All of it looked nice, but Michael knew none of these additions had been approved by him, and many were built on portions of land that technically weren't part of the original residential leases. Still, he said nothing. It wasn't worth disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood over a few flower beds and lights. Besides, he had all the documentation safely stored, and if the day ever came when he needed to set the record straight, he could. Karen's leadership style was straightforward. She liked visible progress and clear results. If something needed doing, she arranged for it, sometimes before the rest of the board had even weighed in. She wasn't unkind, but she was decisive, the kind of person who assumed that if an idea was good, it should simply be put into action. By the end of her first year, Karen had transformed the HOA into a well-oiled machine. Monthly newsletters went out like clockwork. Community events were better attended than ever, and even small. Disputes between neighbors seemed to be resolved faster. Many residents admired her energy and saw her as the reason the neighborhood had become such a desirable place to live. Michael, however, saw something else, a slow but steady expansion of the HOA's control. It was subtle, almost invisible, if you weren't paying attention. Areas that were once considered private or neutral were being referred to as association property. Decisions about landscaping and construction were being made without any mention of the actual land ownership. It wasn't yet a problem, but Michael understood patterns, and this pattern suggested that sooner or later, Karen would set her sights on something bigger. He was right. The first sign came in the form of an announcement in the monthly newsletter. In the center of the page, beneath a smiling photo of Karen, were the words, "Exciting new plans for the future of our community." And in smaller print beneath it, "Details coming soon at the next HOA meeting." Michael didn't know what those plans were yet, but something told him he should be in the room when she revealed them. The next HOA meeting took place on a Thursday evening inside the small community center at the edge of the neighborhood. Michael arrived early, choosing a seat toward the back where he could watch without drawing attention. The room filled quickly. Board members up front, homeowners scattered across folding chairs, and Karen standing confidently near a display board covered in neatly arranged papers. When the meeting began, the usual updates passed quickly: financial reports, neighborhood, maintenance updates, and a reminder about the upcoming summer barbecue. Then Karen stepped forward, a subtle smile on her face, and tapped the large sheet of paper pinned to the board. "This," she began, is the start of something wonderful for our neighborhood. The paper displayed a color-coded map of the entire community. Streets and homes were neatly outlined, but Michael's attention was drawn to the shaded areas in green. These were parcels of land marked for beautification projects and community enhancements. He knew those shaded areas well because many of them were still legally his. Karen explained her vision with enthusiasm. There would be new walking trails weaving between the houses, small picnic areas with benches, and upgraded landscaping around the retention pond. Decorative stone walls would mark each neighborhood entrance. It all sounded pleasant enough, but Michael knew the cost of such projects wasn't just financial. It meant building on land that the HOA had never been given permission to alter. The meeting ended with applause. Neighbors approached Karen afterward, offering ideas and volunteers. Michael stayed seated until the room began to empty, quietly, taking note of which parcels were mentioned and what changes were planned for each. In the weeks that followed, work crews appeared. Trucks unloaded rolls of sod, stacks of lumber, and pallets of bricks. New flower beds sprang up where open grass had been. Pathways began to take shape along the edges of properties. Michael walked the neighborhood casually, blending in with dog walkers and joggers while observing every addition. The most striking change was at the retention pond. Once just a simple functional basin, it now had fresh landscaping, a paved walkway, and decorative lighting. Residents loved it. They took evening strolls there, children rode bikes along the path, and couples watched the sunset by the water. Michael could admit it looked nice, but he also knew none of it had been approved through the lease agreements. It wasn't just the pond. A vacant strip of land between two cul-de-sacs had been turned into a community garden. Karen hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with lemonade and cookies, to celebrate its opening. Michael attended quietly, smiling politely, but storing away every detail. He began keeping a folder in his home office. Inside were photographs of each new addition, printouts of property maps, and copies of the original lease documents. Each time a new project began, he added it to the folder with the date and location clearly labeled. To the casual observer, Michael was just another resident enjoying the improvements. But in truth, he was building a careful record, one that showed how far the HOA's reach had extended without his consent. Karen, meanwhile, seemed unaware of the silent observer in her midst. She spoke confidently at each monthly meeting, proudly reporting the progress being made. She referred to our property more often now, and residents began to echo her words without question. The changes didn't disrupt Michael's daily life, but the pattern was undeniable. Each project reached a little further, claimed a little more space, and treated the land as if its true ownership didn't exist. And then, one afternoon, Michael noticed a cluster of orange survey flags planted in the open field at the neighborhood's northern edge, one of the largest parcels still under his ownership. Whatever Karen had planned next, it was bigger than flower beds or walking trails. Michael stood there for a long moment, watching the flags flutter in the breeze. He didn't interfere, didn't remove them, and didn't make a call. Not yet. Instead, he went home, opened his folder, and added a fresh page at the very front. A page labeled, simply, The Big One. The next HOA meeting was busier than usual. Chairs had been added in rows, and the low hum of conversation filled the room. Everyone seemed to know that something big was about to be announced. Michael arrived early again, his folder tucked under his arm, and found a seat in the same quiet corner. Karen entered with her usual confidence, a neat stack of papers in one hand and a rolled-up map in the other. She greeted residents warmly, shaking hands and exchanging quick updates about gardens, paint colors, and neighborhood watch patrols. When the meeting began, she skipped the usual order of business and went straight to her presentation. "This," she said as she unrolled the map on the display stand, "is the future centerpiece of our community." The map revealed a large, section of the neighborhood's northern edge, the very area Michael had seen marked with orange survey flags. The plan was bold. In place of the open field, Karen envisioned a fully developed recreational complex, a community clubhouse, a swimming pool, 2 tennis courts, and a playground. Paved parking spaces would line one side, and decorative landscaping would frame the entire property. Applause rippled through the crowd. Families leaned forward in their seats, already imagining summer afternoons by the pool and weekend gatherings at the clubhouse. Karen's voice carried above the noise as she detailed how the project would increase property values and make the neighborhood the most desirable in the region. Michael kept his expression neutral, but inside, he felt the weight of the moment. That parcel of land, every inch of it, was still legally his. No construction could begin there without his written consent, and no such consent had been asked for, let alone given. As Karen moved on to discuss funding, Michael listened closely. The HOA planned to use a combination of reserve funds and a special assessment to cover initial costs. She explained that early site work would begin within the month, followed by a phased build-out over the next year. A few residents raised concerns about the cost, but Karen handled them with practiced ease. She spoke about long-term benefits, increased resale values, and the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to elevate the neighborhood. By the time the discussion ended, most objections had faded. The motion to proceed passed with an overwhelming majority. After the meeting, residents gathered in small clusters, excitedly talking about the new amenities. Karen moved between groups like a host at a party, her enthusiasm contagious. Michael stayed back, waiting until the room began to thin. Before approaching the display board, he studied the map for several minutes. The placement of the pool, the clubhouse footprint, the parking lot. It was all carefully planned. He could tell a professional design firm had been involved. And yet, despite the polish of the presentation, one glaring detail was missing. There was no mention of property ownership or land rights. Michael didn't speak to Karen that night. He didn't challenge the plan in public. Instead, he left quietly, walking back to his truck with the map's image burned into his mind. At home, he added a new section to his folder. Into it went a printed copy of the meeting minutes, a photograph of the displayed map, and a note about the vote. He knew the situation was shifting. This was no longer about flower beds or walking paths. This was a multi-million-dollar development, planned for land that wasn't part of the HOA's legal control. Over the next week, Michael noticed new activity in the northern field. Surveyors walked the property with clipboards, marking lines with spray paint. Trucks delivered stacks of materials for soil testing. A portable office trailer appeared near the road, its door propped open and a fresh permit posted in the window. He didn't interfere. Not yet. But he began reviewing the original lease agreements in detail. Every clause, every signature, every date, all of it was exactly as he remembered. The rights to the land were clear and absolute. Michael knew the next move was inevitable. Karen was about to push forward, and when she did, the truth about who really owned the ground beneath her grand plan would be impossible to ignore. The northern field, once a quiet stretch of grass and wildflowers, was now a hive of activity. The morning air carried the hum of machinery as backhoes dug test trenches and survey teams hammered stakes into the soil. Trucks came and went in a steady flow, their tires leaving deep tracks in the soft earth. From his front porch, Michael could see it all. The field wasn't far from his own home, and each day's progress was visible. He noticed how quickly things were moving. This wasn't just early site prep. The HOA was moving as if full-scale construction could begin any moment. Karen was everywhere. She stood on site with a clipboard, speaking with contractors, pointing to different sections of the property and taking notes. She wore a bright safety vest and carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she was entirely in control. Residents walking by stopped to chat with her, offering coffee or snacks, and she'd smile, nod, and assure them the project was ahead of schedule. Michael didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead, he decided to take a quiet drive to the county records office. There, in the cool, paper-scented archive room, he pulled the original property documents from the file drawer. They were exactly as he remembered, his name printed clearly on the deeds, the lease agreements attached, and the terms unambiguous. He scanned copies of everything and slipped them into his growing folder back home. The next HOA meeting came quickly, and Michael made sure to be there. Karen's updates were brimming with confidence. The soil tests had come back excellent, she reported, and utility lines would soon be extended to the site. The contractors had penciled in a tentative groundbreaking ceremony for next month. Michael listened, calm but deliberate. He didn't interrupt, but his mind was already running through the timeline. If they reached the groundbreaking without, knowing the truth, the consequences could be severe, financially and legally. After the meeting, Karen caught him in the hallway. "Michael, I don't think I've seen you around the site much," she said brightly. "I've walked by a few times," he replied evenly. "Seems like a big project." "It's going to transform the neighborhood," she said, her tone glowing with pride. "You'll see. It's the best thing we've ever done." Michael gave a small nod and excused himself, but that brief exchange told him what he needed to know. Karen had no idea the project was on land she didn't control. The following week, the site trailer's door stayed open longer, and Michael noticed new blueprints spread across the tables inside. He waited until a quiet Sunday morning, when the crew was gone, to take a closer look from the road. Even from that distance, he could see the planned pool's location, the clubhouse footprint, and the parking lot layout. All of it was detailed, precise, and all of it was still on his land. He began to prepare in earnest. His folder now included not just documents, but also a written timeline of every action the HOA had taken on the site. He included photographs of the survey flags, the soil testing, and the contractors at work. He wanted the story to be crystal clear when the time came to reveal it. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's excitement was growing. Social media posts buzzed with anticipation. Families talked about future swim lessons, weekend tennis matches, and how much better the neighborhood would look with a proper clubhouse. Few, if any, questioned the project's legitimacy. Michael kept his silence. For now, the HOA was still in the planning and preparation stage, but the moment they crossed the line into actual construction, the balance would shift. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Michael stood at the edge of the field, looking at the rows of survey flags glowing orange in the fading light. The hum of the machinery had stopped for the day, leaving only the quiet rustle of grass in the breeze. He knew it wouldn't be quiet for long. The groundbreaking was coming, and when it did, the first shovel of dirt would set everything in motion. The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that made photographs look perfect. The HOA had gone all out. A large white tent had been set up on the northern field, rows of folding chairs lined neatly inside, and a banner hung across the entrance that read, "Future site of our community complex." Karen moved between guests like a seasoned host. She wore a crisp blazer over her safety vest, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that never wavered. A small podium stood at the front of the tent, and beside it, a row of ceremonial shovels gleamed in the sunlight, each one adorned with a bright ribbon. Residents arrived in clusters, some bringing children, others carrying coffee cups and pastries. There was laughter, excitement, and the hum of anticipation. Local media had even shown up, a photographer snapping shots of the crowd while a reporter spoke with Karen about the most ambitious project in the neighborhood's history. Michael stood at the back, just outside the tent's shade, his hands in his pockets. He'd been deliberate in deciding to attend, not as a participant, but as an observer. His folder, containing every document he'd collected, was in his truck parked nearby. Today wasn't about starting an argument. Today was about letting the HOA take their final step before he intervened. The ceremony began with Karen stepping up to the podium. Her voice carried clearly as she thanked everyone for coming and spoke about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She recounted months of planning, consultations with contractors, and the overwhelming community support for the project. "We stand here today on the future heart of our neighborhood," she said, gesturing to the field behind her. "A place where our families will gather, where memories will be made, and where our community spirit will shine brighter than ever before." Applause filled the tent. Cameras clicked. Karen invited several HOA board members to join her at the row of shovels. Together they lined up, posed for photos, and then, with a synchronized movement, pushed the shovels into the ground. The crowd cheered as they lifted the first clumps of soil, tossing them aside in a symbolic gesture. Michael watched closely. That simple act, the turning of dirt, was more than ceremonial. It marked the physical beginning of work on his land without permission. In that moment, the leverage shifted entirely into his hands. After the speeches, Karen mingled with the crowd again, accepting congratulations and posing for more photographs. A few residents chatted excitedly about how quickly construction might begin. Contractors stood at the edges of the site, already discussing timelines. Michael stayed quiet until the crowd began to thin. Then he walked slowly toward Karen, who was standing near the podium packing up her notes. "Nice ceremony," he said evenly. "Thank you," she replied warmly. "It's a big day for us." "It is," he agreed. "Out of curiosity, did you ever confirm ownership of this field?" The smile on her face faltered for the briefest second. "Well, it's part of the neighborhood," she said quickly. "It's under HOA management." "Management," Michael repeated, "isn't the same as ownership." Karen blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." Michael gave a small nod and stepped back. "I'll send you something this week. You'll want to read it carefully." He didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing by the podium with a faint crease of confusion forming between her eyebrows. That evening, Michael returned to his desk and began drafting a formal letter to the HOA board. It was polite, professional, and very clear. Attached were scanned copies of the original deeds and lease agreements, highlighting the fact that the land was privately owned and not available for development without his express consent. He knew the letter would land like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every part of the HOA. And he also knew that Karen would likely be the first to feel its impact. The next morning, as he sealed the envelope, Michael felt the first real sense of momentum shift. The groundbreaking had been their celebration. The next move would be his. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between utility bills and flyers in the HOA office's mail stack. Karen didn't notice it at first. She was busy on a phone call with a contractor finalizing the next week's schedule for site grading. When she finally slit the envelope open, her expression shifted from casual focus to something tighter. The kind of look people get when they realize the details don't match the picture they've been holding in their head. Inside was a neatly typed letter on plain white paper. Michael's tone was calm, almost formal. He congratulated the HOA on their groundbreaking ceremony, acknowledged the effort put into community planning, and then laid out the situation in terms that were impossible to misunderstand. The northern field, he wrote, was not HOA property. It was part of a parcel of land he had purchased years before the neighborhood was built. The deeds were attached, along with maps clearly showing the boundaries. The original developer had leased certain portions of the land for roads and utilities, but the field, the one the HOA had just broken ground on, was never part of that agreement. In closing, he stated plainly, any use of this land for construction, alteration, or permanent improvements required his explicit written consent. Karen read it twice, then a third time. She set the pages down, sat back in her chair, and stared at the wall for a long moment. By the end of the day, the letter had made its way to every member of the HOA board. That night, They called an emergency meeting in the small conference room at the clubhouse. The atmosphere was tense from the start. "Is this for real?" asked Jim, the treasurer, holding up the letter. "It has county seals and property records attached," replied Sandra, the secretary. "If those documents are accurate, then yes, it's real." Karen folded her arms. "We've been managing that field for years, mowing it, maintaining it, keeping it clean. That has to count for something." "Management isn't ownership," Sandra said quietly, repeating Michael's exact words from the ceremony. They debated for over an hour. Some board members suggested negotiating with Michael right away. Others thought the HOA could challenge his claim legally. But when they looked through their own records, there was nothing in the HOA's files showing the field had ever been deeded to them. Meanwhile, in his own home, Michael was not celebrating. He was methodical. He reviewed the letter again, checking for any points that might be misinterpreted. He knew Karen well enough by now to expect she wouldn't fold easily. The next day, Karen called him directly. Her tone was polite but brisk. "I received your letter," she began. "Good," Michael said. "I wasn't sure if you'd have questions." "Oh, I have questions," she replied. "We've been using that land for community purposes for years. You've never objected until now. Why wait?" Michael didn't raise his voice. "Because no one tried to build a permanent structure there until now. Lawn care and walking. Paths are one thing, a multi-million-dollar facility is another." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What are you asking for?" she finally said. "I'm not asking for anything," Michael replied. "I'm stating the terms. If the HOA wants to proceed, it needs to lease the land. Otherwise, construction stops immediately." Karen didn't respond right away. He could almost hear her weighing her next words. "I'll take this to the board," she said at last, and the line went dead. That evening, the HOA sent a formal reply acknowledging Michael's claim but requesting time to review the legal standing and potential arrangements. To Michael, that was as good as a silent admission they had no deed in their favor. But the bigger shift came from the residents. Word spread quickly after the emergency meeting. Neighbors began stopping Michael on walks, asking cautiously if it was true. He kept his answers simple. "Yes, it's my land. Yes, I'm willing to work something out," and let the curiosity grow on its own. Karen now found herself balancing two pressures: residents who wanted the project to move forward, and the inescapable fact that they couldn't move another inch without Michael's approval. She had built her leadership on the idea of control. Now she was staring at a truth she couldn't talk her way around. The ground beneath their grandest project belonged entirely to someone else, and Michael had just put himself in the strongest position he'd ever been in. 2 days after their terse phone call, Michael received an official email from the HOA board inviting him to a special meeting to discuss potential arrangements regarding the northern field. The language was formal, almost stiff, but the fact they'd reached out at all told him the board had accepted the reality of the situation. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the clubhouse's small conference room. Michael arrived 5 minutes early, carrying the same folder of documents he'd shown Karen before, along with a fresh set of papers he'd prepared that morning. Inside, the board members sat in a semicircle around the table. Karen occupied her usual spot at the head, a legal pad in front of her. Her expression was composed, though Michael noticed the slight tightness around her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she began once everyone had settled. "We've reviewed your claim, and while some questions remain, it's clear the land in question is indeed recorded under your ownership." Michael gave a small nod. "That's correct." "What we want to know," Karen continued, "is what it will take to allow our project to move forward. The community has invested a great deal of time and energy into this plan." Michael opened his folder and slid a thin document toward her. "This is a lease agreement, 20-year term, renewable by mutual consent. Annual rent is reasonable. lower than market rate, and covers continued use of the land for community purposes. However, any major construction or alterations will require my written approval. Karen scanned the document. The rest of the board leaned in to read over her shoulder. "This is less expensive than I expected," she said after a moment. Michael's tone remained even. "I'm not looking to profit unfairly, but I do want clarity. This ensures the HOA can host events, maintain green space, and even build, as long as the plans are agreed upon beforehand. No surprises?" Jim, the treasurer, tapped his pen thoughtfully. "It's a fair deal. A lot cheaper than buying the land outright, which we can't afford anyway." Sandra, the secretary, nodded. "And it avoids legal disputes. Those could drag on for months." Karen didn't speak right away. She was calculating, weighing the optics, the politics, and perhaps her own pride. Finally, she set the papers down and met Michael's eyes. "If we sign this, the community complex can still be built?" "With the right approvals," Michael said. "If the plans work for both of us, yes." There was a brief silence, then Karen gave a single nod. "All right, let's move forward." The board voted unanimously to accept the lease. Karen signed. First, her pen strokes neat and deliberate, followed by the other board members. When Michael signed last, there was a subtle shift in the room, a quiet acknowledgement that the balance of control had changed. Over the next few weeks, the HOA adjusted its project plans to meet Michael's conditions. Instead of sprawling across the entire northern field, the new design kept a generous portion of the space open for walking trails and community picnics. Michael even offered to help landscape it, ensuring it remained both beautiful and practical. As construction began months later, this time with his approval, neighbors began to see Michael differently. He wasn't just the quiet man on the edge of the neighborhood anymore. He was the reason the HOA had avoided a costly legal battle and still gotten a facility they could use. Karen remained president, but her approach changed. She became more transparent with residents, more cautious about assuming what the HOA controlled. At public events, she sometimes even credited Michael with helping the community find a better path forward. For Michael, the outcome was exactly what he'd hoped for. He still owned every inch beneath those 98 homes and the green spaces around them. And now, he also had a formal agreement that ensured the HOA couldn't make another move on his land without his say. On a warm Saturday afternoon, months after the new complex opened, Michael walked past the field and saw families enjoying the space. Kids chasing each other along the trails, parents chatting by picnic tables, the new building standing quietly in the background. He smiled to himself. The land was still his, the neighborhood was thriving, and the rules were clear for everyone. In the end, he hadn't needed to fight to win. He just needed to remind them of a simple truth. You can build as much as you want, but the ground you stand on will always tell you who's really in charge.